It is my honor and distinct pleasure to present Public Counsel's 2021 William O. Douglas Award to the one and only John Legend.
Hello, everybody. I have to thank Jason, of course, for that kind introduction. I have to thank my friend and my hero, Brian Stevenson, for his words, and thank all of you for being here today. Thank you for presenting this award to me. It is truly humbling, and it's truly an honor for me to be here. I also want to recognize the other honorees, Betsy Beers. I'm so glad we were able to introduce Public Counsel to you, and that it's become a part of your life, and that you've passed the word on to others. I think that's a beautiful thing, and may we all leave here and pass the word on to others and continue this amazing work. We thank you, Betsy, for all that you're doing to advance representation from the media to the courtroom. Also, a congratulations to our friends at Netflix who were honored tonight with the Corporate Achievement Award. As Jason has said, we've done some work with Netflix over the years through our production company, Get Lifted Film Company, which, of course, my friends Ty Stiglorius and Mike Jackson are a part of. And Ty is my manager, but also my partner in a lot of the work that we do to try to make the world a better place. And then with Mike, we try to create projects that are interesting, inclusive, and representative of different people's stories, like Jingle Jangle, A Christmas Journey, so that my children and children around the world who look like them can see themselves as protagonists in a holiday story. Or, as Jason mentioned, bringing Black literature into the mainstream with Monster, an adaptation of the Walter Dean Myers novel that follows a young man who is fighting to prove his innocence in a criminal justice system that has prejudged him. We produced that film because we know it's important to humanize those who interact with our criminal justice system. Because before anyone interacts with the criminal justice system, they are sons and daughters and siblings and friends and students, partners, neighbors, and members of our community. They're human. We have to recognize their humanity. And so I'm honored to stand here tonight in a room full of people who are committed to seeing and championing the humanity in us all, particularly in a moment where others are actively stoking fear and division. What happens when we choose humanity over fear? It means we don't see Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown or George Floyd as walking stereotypes, as weaponized humans. We see them as individuals. It means American lives don't count more than Afghani lives. It means we see young Palestinian kids not as a future security threat or a demographic challenge, but as future fathers, mothers, and neighbors. It's actually quite a challenge for us to love humankind in this way. Professor Cornel West gives us a word for what this kind of love looks like in public, and that word is justice. If you're committed to loving in public, it requires you opening your eyes to injustice, to see the world through the eyes of another. This is not a passive activity, We have to read. We have to travel to other neighborhoods, be proximate, as Brian Stevenson says. You may have to get your hands dirty. You have to allow people to love you, and you have to love them back, which brings me to public counsel. Can we take a moment to thank public counsel? Thank you, public counsel. Over the last 51 years, you have done the active work of justice, from working to end the $2 billion bail industry in California, which profits from and contributes to mass incarceration and preys on vulnerable communities, to defending clients against unjust evictions during the pandemic. You have been at the front line fighting for those on the margins, those at the intersection of multiple oppressive factors. This is the epitome of the type of radical love I'm talking about. I want to share a little bit about how I came to work on criminal justice reform and to be on this stage. As we mentioned before, growing up, my role models were people like Paul Robeson and Stevie Wonder and Nina Simone and Harry Belafonte, and each of them taught me that as artists, we can play a unique role in activism because we aren't tethered to election cycles or legislative bargaining. As artists, we speak out, we move people to imagine an entirely different system, and we can shape the way the nation views justice or love in public. Fighting for reforms built on compassion and love is the work we have done for 8 years with our organization, Free America. It's our campaign to end mass incarceration and reinvest in communities disproportionately impacted by systemic racism. We have a criminal justice system that does not reflect the American belief of equality in the eyes of the law. The financial toll of a system like that is irresponsible, but the human toll of a system like that is unconscionable. And the ripple effects of mass incarceration extend beyond the present day and will affect generations to come unless we change course. I started Free America with a listening and learning tour. And my very first visits started right in the Los Angeles area. I got on the 5 and went up to Sylmar to tour one of the Los Angeles juvenile detention centers, followed by a tour of the state prison in Lancaster. I met with a 15-year-old girl who'd been shuttled from the principal's office to jail for fighting on the schoolyard. I met a 17-year-old with a drug addiction. I met a new mother who was serving a 2-year sentence for what was essentially a family fight. I met a young man, Jarrett Harper, who was imprisoned for killing someone who had serially abused him and his family. I saw how many of the people incarcerated were struggling with their own trauma or with mental illness or both. And while some of these people had hurt people, I didn't meet anyone with a simple story. And that is what we have failed to grapple with for the past 40 years, as we've criminalized more and more acts and enacted harsher and harsher sentencing requirements. There is just no way that incarcerating those people was making any of their problems better. It also was not making our communities healthier, safer, or more just. As Brian Stevenson, who happens to be a 2016 William O. Douglas honoree, likes to point out, that each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. That even if you tell a lie, you're not just a liar. And even if you take something that doesn't belong to you, you are not just a thief. I don't want to live in a nation that judges people only by their worst actions. I don't want to live in a nation that criminalizes addiction and poverty. I don't want to live in a nation that takes broken people and breaks them further. Instead, I want us to build a nation that turns our attention towards the needs, hopes, and dreams of the presently and formerly incarcerated. Because when, as a society, we can appreciate their experiences and stories, we can move towards a criminal justice system that does not perpetuate a cycle of hopelessness, but helps people up. It is how we create a system that does not consign an entire class of people to a life on the margins. Brian also speaks about the language of fear and hatred, and how this language has fueled decades of discriminatory criminal justice policy and practice. We're seeing how this language is used now to deny people who are impacted by the criminal justice and immigration systems of their dignity. We see it when governors prevent vaccine access to people in prison, or when the people incarcerated in Alabama are given ivermectin instead of proper treatment for COVID-19, or when horse whips are cracked on the backs of Haitian migrants seeking asylum. We are living in daunting times, but the leadership of organizations like Public Counsel, who are not only protecting the legal rights of the most vulnerable in our communities, but also ensuring that we collectively hear, understand, and act on their stories, is what gives me hope. Despite the problems plaguing our country and the world, I believe we have a lot of reason to be hopeful. I'll give you one word, one reason to be hopeful: Florida. Now, I know that some of you might be thinking that Florida is not usually the state that inspires optimism. It's usually the opposite. But my work in Florida inspires me. Almost 4 years ago, in 2018, we joined Desmond Meade and the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition as he took on an audacious challenge and launched a campaign to restore voting rights for people with felony convictions. We partnered with him at Free America. We shared people's stories. We asked neighbors to talk with their neighbors. We took on this challenge in Florida that early on felt daunting, if not impossible. Only love can give you the power to take on these kinds of odds. Love of the people you're fighting with, and love of the people you're trying to persuade. The basic belief that if we recognize each other's humanity and dignity, then no matter our differences, we'll end up wanting the best for each other. And when the time came to vote on the restoration of voting rights, they put it on the ballot in a year when Republicans won the gubernatorial race and the Senate race, and we needed 60% of the vote. We did not win 60% of the vote. We won 65% of the vote. We passed a constitutional amendment that restored voting rights to more than 1.4 million Floridians. And 1 year later, I stood in a Florida courthouse as a judge literally made it official for a room full of formerly incarcerated people. Some of these people hadn't voted in decades and hadn't really felt connected to their communities at all since their incarceration. And I was in tears celebrating, and so were they, because in that moment, they felt connected. Because for the first time since their incarceration, they felt their humanity was being recognized, and their voices, their stories, and their aspirations could now be heard. 2020 was a year in which we all acutely witnessed the racial disparities of our country that existed, and they go well beyond our interactions with the police. Communities and organizers were standing up to say, yes, we want to end mass incarceration. Yes, we want to end police killings. But achieving racial equity does not stop there. In the voting booth, poll taxes and reading tests have been replaced by needless and intentionally suppressive voter ID laws. Black names are purged from the voting rolls without warning and for no reason other than who they think they're likely to vote for. In our schools, Brown versus Board of Education may be the law of the land, but integration orders from the decades that followed are being rescinded across the country. There are similar stories in housing. Studies have shown that across the country, our neighborhoods are nearly as segregated as they were a half century ago. White flight has evolved into gentrification, and this year the Black home ownership rate hit its lowest level on record. Much like public counsel works across multiple practice areas, I wanted my team to do something similar. We challenged ourselves to think about how we could address the racial inequities that exist across all these different indicators for success: health, criminal justice, education, jobs, housing. And when we looked back on our work at Free America, we saw that we had been laying out a blueprint for impact, starting locally, starting by building the understanding and love that we have for each other. In Los Angeles, where we are fortunate to be tonight, I've helped advocates on the ground pass Proposition 47 in 2014, which reduced some nonviolent crimes to misdemeanors, and Measure J in 2020, which requires LA County to spend at least 10% of its general fund on social services and jail diversion programs, as well as elect a new district attorney. The blueprint is not just for reforming our criminal justice system, but also for building institutions and policy that recognize our shared humanity, while also understanding that every person, every community needs something different to thrive, to prosper. So we've launched a new initiative called Human Level. Our purpose: to ignite systemic change and build racial equity across American cities and communities. To move beyond national gridlock, we took on an approach rooted in community, in solutions at the local, the human level. And as lawyers, you know what it's like. You work closely with individuals, families, and communities. And likely better than any of us, you all know that working locally changes our relationship to the problem. Proximity. Because these issues are no longer abstract. Rather, these problems are ones that your friends, your family, your neighbors experience. They're personal. And when these issues become personal, we start to feel responsible for the solution. Human Level was born from the belief that local governments and organizers know most about their communities because they are of their communities. They know what they need to do to fight hunger and homelessness and violence in their neighborhoods. And furthermore, local governments are usually those with the most power to determine the everyday realities of our lives. Who lives where? Who goes to school where? Do we all feel safe walking down the street? We saw the outsized impact of local governments as a challenge, but also as an opportunity. There are so many people in cities across the country who are reimagining what it looks like to be in community and work together with government and outside of it. But in order for them to make change on the scale our communities need, these people need resources and they need support. So with Human Level, we're going to give them that support. To start, we're starting with funding 50 fellows who we're embedding in 11 cities. These fellows are each spearheading projects designed to identify the roots of the problems in their cities, what's broken, and invest in meaningful solutions in cooperation and at the request of their local mayors, the city government, and the broader community. One of the fellows in Los Angeles is actually working on helping to implement Measure J, reallocating funding previously used to incarcerate folks and moving it to mental health treatment and services. So one lesson that these fellows can teach us all is that the work of justice starts at home. When you connect at this local human level, it's hard to dismiss another person's humanity because we have to connect with the part of another person's story that is also in our story, in our past, in our present. I want to end by saying again how honored I am to be among this group. I am grateful for days like today, days like this where I get to share the stage with champions fighting against discrimination, fighting to give a voice to those in our communities who for too long have gone unheard. Days when I can come to a place like this and be among people like all of you who lead with humanity and compassion, who put your money where your mouth is. Because today, days like this are when we are reminded of the struggle, all of it, the immensity and the heartache of the challenge. But also we're reminded of the possibilities, the possibility of justice, the possibility of equality, a possibility of love in public. Thank you so much to Public Counsel. Thank all of you. God bless you. Have a good night. Thank you.